The San Antonio Chamber of Commerce is proud to partner with the City of San Antonio and UT Health Science Center at San Antonio to bring this conversation to the forefront as we move into the next phase of recovering from this pandemic. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our President and CEO, Richard Perez.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so pleased that so many of you could join us for our 6th Login and Learn webinar. So we've created this series called Login and Learn to be able to push out information to our businesses, their employees, and the general public, and they've been very well received. In fact, we have right at little over 100 people on our webinar this morning, and more are joining even as I speak. So thank you all for doing that. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our Login and Learn series sponsor, and that is the San Antonio River Authority. San Antonio River Authority, of course, is responsible for the San Antonio River and the entire watershed from San Antonio all the way down to the coast. They're responsible, of course, for some of the most iconic projects that we've had in our community in a long time, like the Museum Reach and the River Reach. And so we want to thank them for the commitment to not only the river, but their commitment to San Antonio and our resilience. So thanks, Sarah. All right. So in all the calls I've been with city officials, members of the business community, our members, there is a clear recognition and acknowledgement that these are unprecedented times, and they've brought about mental health concerns, and they've brought them to a new level. People are feeling the pressure of teaching their children from home, financial uncertainty, job loss, illness, and being separated from support systems. At the same time, business owners also feel the same way. They feel the exact same way, in fact, and they're grappling with how to, reopen their doors, keep their doors open, reconfiguring operations and physical space, of course, to ensure safety, and bringing back and retraining employees. Employers understand that this has been a tough time for a lot of people. We have heard several accounts of business owners noticing that their employees are struggling, but they are just not sure the best way to approach the topic and where to direct people for support. It is this important input from our members that inspired us to work today to develop this panel that we'll hear from in a moment. We have with us today Jenny Hixon from the San Antonio Metro Health Department, Police Chief William McManus, and also Dr. Adriana Diurich from UT Health Science in San Antonio. And we hope the conversation will shed light on the impact of COVID and what it's had on mental illness in our community, and provide viewers, employers, and individuals with practical resources for taking care of themselves and their employees. Before I introduce our speakers, however, I want to take a moment to thank my team at the San Antonio Chamber. Like all of you, we have had to shift and work from home, and we have been dealing with our own set of stresses. And so the team has done an excellent work working together as a team, using these new mediums to push information out. And I think they've done it very, very well. And so I want to say thank you for sticking with it and for showing resilience during this unprecedented time. And now I'd like to introduce Jenny Hixon, our first speaker. Jenny is the Violence Prevention Manager at Metro Health. There, she leads child abuse, domestic violence, and gun violence prevention efforts, from a public health perspective. She graduated from the University of Texas at Austin and completed her master's in public health at Tulane University. Jenny has 15 years of experience in community-based advocacy for children and families. Before joining Metro Health, she was the Director of Education and Outreach for Raíces, Texas. Jenny, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Oops, there's an echo. So what I was going to be talking about today with y'all is the impact of COVID on domestic violence and how that intersects with sort of mental health concerns. Are that we know that domestic violence is only increased in times of stress. And we know that obviously there's a lot of stress going on in our community from a lot of different changes that COVID has brought. So very briefly, before we talk about domestic violence, I did want to share a little bit about a public health perspective on domestic violence and how that's slightly different from maybe the approach that you've seen before in addressing domestic violence. We're all becoming really familiar with some of the terms that we in public health use all the time about epidemiology and flattening the curve, and these are terms that normally are very in-house, so it's been interesting to see everyone talking about them. But a public health perspective on violence prevention and changing outcomes is really a very long-term perspective. So we're a science of prevention, and prevention is slow, especially with problems like domestic violence. They take years to address the root causes, and they're not fast fixes. So if you look at some of the work that we're doing with SAPD and with the CCDV, the approaches that we're taking, they're not going to be approaches that are going to change things in 6 months or a year. They're going to take 5 years, 10 years to really change the way that our community approaches some of the root issues around domestic violence. So first slide, please. Thanks. So what do we know about domestic violence and disasters? This is an issue that's actually been studied pretty well, but mainly looking at natural disasters. So during Hurricane Katrina in 2005, there was a 12% increase in domestic violence experienced by women in the period immediately after the hurricane. There was also an increase in sexual assault around that same period, and it was noted that they were particularly violent after Hurricane Katrina. The same thing was found in Hurricane Harvey in 2019, that the stress associated with the disaster increased both child abuse and domestic violence. The factors that were associated most with an increase in domestic violence and child abuse were reduced access to resources, increased stress due to job loss, and disconnection from social support. These were all the factors that were most associated with an increase in violence. And if you look at those factors and you look at what we're experiencing as a community around COVID, those are all of the things that folks are most struggling with, right? We're struggling with a disconnection from our typical social support networks. Lots of people have lost their jobs. So the choices that we make are the choices that we have. That's the fundamental concept in public health, is that we make the choices based on our available information. And sometimes they don't always seem to make sense, but if you're in the same space as that person, they make sense. Next slide, please. So what do we know about the impact of the lockdowns worldwide? So the best available evidence that we have is not actually from the United States, but it's from what we know is happening internationally from some of the countries that are a few weeks or months ahead of us in COVID. So in France, they reported a 30% increase in domestic violence reports since their March 17th lockdown. In Argentina, they reported a 25% increase in emergency calls. Again, in Cyprus and in Singapore, they saw the same thing. So the UN did an analysis trying to figure out what they think the impact of all of these lockdowns are going to have on gender-based violence and access to family planning worldwide, because those two things are very much intersect. And they expect that if we see 6 months in lockdown, that we're going to see an increase in 31 million cases of gender-based violence. If we have 9 months worth of worldwide lockdown, we'll have an increase of 45 million cases of gender-based violence. So this is a significant problem, not just for our community or for our country, but it's for everyone. Next slide, please. So what do we know about Texas and the United States? We really don't have a clear picture because there's a lot of conflicting evidence. There are some cities that are reporting increases in calls for domestic violence help. There are some cities that are reporting decreases in domestic violence calls and needs for help. The domestic violence hotline the calls have remained steady, so they have not seen an increase or a decrease. What we do know is that locally, our local domestic violence shelter reported that the census was down at the beginning of the COVID lockdown, and the chief can speak to what's going on with SAPD, but that we also know that protective order applications have been increasing, but that's not clear if that's because of a change in what's going on in our community or if it's because the Family Justice Center and their county made it possible to apply for protective orders online, which is a great new opportunity for our community, but it made it easier for folks to apply for protective orders. Next slide, please. So in addition to being the violence prevention manager, what I'm doing as part of COVID is I'm running the COVID-19 hotline. And we've answered over 23,000 calls in the last 8 weeks. 8 weeks we've been doing this. And in talking to those calls, we get a range of all of the concerns that the community has. We've briefed 86% of the callers that we've talked to on domestic violence and child abuse resources. So for every single call that we talk to, we have a script where we say, you know, we know that this is a tough time for our community, and we're asking you to help us get information out about domestic violence and child abuse. We don't frame it as this might be something you need, because that might be hard for folks if they're just calling for information about testing and they're not ready to make an outcry in that moment. We don't want to have people feel cornered, essentially, but we give them the information about how to get help about domestic violence or child abuse for their friends and family. So when we start that conversation, first of all, when we first started running through that script, folks were a little nervous that people were not going to be happy to get that information, but we've overwhelmingly had a positive reaction that people wanted the information and they started saying, oh, yeah, I'm concerned about that too, or I have friends or family. But most of what we've heard has been people disclosing stories of friends and family that they're worried about. We've also had employers call in and ask for help for employees that they're worried about, that they don't know how to support an employee that they think is at home and in trouble. Family Violence Prevention Services also has reported an increase in family and friends calling. And I bring this up just to say that as employers, as people who are staying in contact with the folks that you work with, you oftentimes are some of the few people who are remaining in contact with people who might be experiencing domestic violence or abuse. And so you have a really crucial role in potentially getting them help and getting them information when they're not able to access their normal support situation. There's normal support networks. Next slide. So you can make a difference, is I guess what I prematurely said, that you have the power to support your employees and to support their families and their family and friends by getting them good information right now as things are changing. Next slide, please. So how can you do that? So we've identified some strategies that you can use as employers to support your employees. Which are to recognize, to check in, to supervise with compassion, to be a safe communicator, to refer to local programs, and to safely interrupt or intervene. Next slide, please. So what does recognize mean? It means as an employer who's still staying in contact with your employees, look for unexplained behavior changes. Now, this is a really tough thing to figure out right now because pretty much all of us are experiencing some behavior changes because we're working from home or we're having to manage working and having kids at home or all of the different things that are going on. So it's important to not jump to conclusions, but to be attuned to what behavior changes might be going on. So for example, if somebody suddenly stops using video conferencing when they had before and they don't want you to see what's going on in the back of their home. If their writing style, if their correspondence style suddenly changes because perhaps their abuser is starting to read and edit what they're writing. Just kind of paying attention to the things that you sort of start piecing together, like maybe something is going on here that I want to just check in on. So the second strategy is to have regular check-ins. So having regular check-ins can provide a sense of connection from isolation. And as an employer, you might be one of the few folks that can remain in contact with people because their abuser might be okay with them continuing to stay in contact with an employer because that's about their job, where they might not be okay with them staying in contact with family and friends. And assess if there are basic needs and services or social support that your employees might need. Maybe not for themselves because they still have a job, but we know that there are a lot of folks where they might be the wage earner in their family when everybody else in their family has lost their job, or everybody else in their family is experiencing a cut in their hours. So connecting them to resources that they might need not just for themselves, but for the other people in their life that they could be supporting. Next slide, please. So supervise with compassion, and we were just talking about this on the hotline, how it's tough right now to be a supervisor and balance the needs of trying to get a lot of work done at a very tough time, with also recognizing that people are in a tough place. So isolation, social distancing, and the inability to have close contact with friends and family can exacerbate current trauma and former trauma. So if someone has experienced violence before, abuse before, being isolated can be really hard because all of those social support systems, all the coping mechanisms are not available for them anymore. So you can ask about people's well-being, but don't put, that was supposed to say put, not out on the spot, but not put them on the spot. So we don't want people to feel like they have to disclose information to an employer that isn't appropriate, but just check in and make known that you're available to provide support if that's something that is needed by your employee. Also, be a safe communicator. So communications can be monitored by abusive partners. So you don't want to text someone and say, hey, I'm really concerned. I think that your husband's beating you up. Because if their husband is checking their text messages, that might precipitate another event happening. So if you're expressing concern, you want to make sure that you're not doing that directly, but providing information to all of your employees at once. That's good for a couple of reasons. One, because you don't know who might be dealing with this issue and you just have absolutely no idea. But it's also a way to get information to someone who you might have concerns about without calling them out or maybe putting them at risk for further abuse. Next slide, please. So you can also refer to programs and promote safety. So provide information to all of your employees about domestic violence and child abuse. You can share local resources and sources of support, which we have at the end of this. And you can make sure that those are programs that are going to be available to provide support. So one of the things that we've been doing as part of the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence is a rapid assessment of who's still providing services, what services they're providing, and if there's been a change in what people can access. For the most part, most of our domestic violence service providers are still operating as normal and are definitely still trying to stay in contact with folks. The next strategy is to safely interrupt and intervene. This is really tricky, so you want to be careful with this. But if you know that a person is experiencing violence and they have agreed to, if they've brought you into that. So a lot of us who work with people, they're not just people that we work with, they become people that are our friends, that are a really important part of our life. So if you're someone who, that's the kind of relationship you have with someone in the workplace, you can help them by having them figure out a signal to let you know that they're in trouble. This has to be at the discretion of the person who's experiencing violence, because you don't want to jump into the middle of a situation where you don't know what's going on and potentially cause more harm than good. But this is a strategy if you have that kind of a relationship and you can have that conversation with folks. Next slide, please. So what resources are available? The National Domestic Violence Hotline is a great resource. They're available 24/7. You can also text them. You can text or call 911. So this is a new thing that you can text 911 in San Antonio, which is really helpful for folks that might not be able to make a phone call. Family Violence Prevention Services, the shelter is still open and operating, and this is the phone number that you can call and get screened and go through safety cleaning. The Bexar County Family Justice Center is also available. They have normal work hours, 8 to 5. There's also the online protective order application that people can complete. And there's also the SAPD Victims Advocacy, where you can call and talk to the crisis prevention team about what you're experiencing. And of course, we always encourage people, if they're concerned about a life-threatening situation, always call 911. Don't call one of these first. If you're afraid someone's really getting hurt, call 911. So that's most of what I have to say. So I will pass it off to our next presenter.
Jenny, thank you. Fantastic work, fantastic resources. And of course, we will post all of this information on that Rapid Response website so that it'll be easy for those that have trouble jotting it all down. But thank you, Jenny. You have been a fantastic partner. Your knowledge and your experience and your heart really shows in all that you've done. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it and my team working with you. You've been just a great partner. Thank you.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
All right, and remember everyone, so we're starting to get a lot of questions, and we will wait till the end. We'll have everybody go through their presentations, and then we'll do questions at the end, so we'll zip through them really quickly. Our next presenter is our police chief, Bill McManus. Chief McManus joined the San Antonio Police Department as chief in March of 2006, and I would like to just add that I happened to be on the San Antonio City Council when we appointed Bill. And it was a very, very easy vote. In fact, one of the easiest votes I've ever had to do as an elected official. He's completely qualified and has just done fantastic work. Bill oversees a department of more than 2,400 sworn officers and more than 800 civilian positions. Chief McManus has over 40 years of experience in law enforcement, having previously served as chief of police in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and also police chief in Dayton, Ohio. Bill, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your good work. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Richard. And pardon my my face mask. I'm in a room with another person, and I want to follow the mayor's orders to the T. So I'm wearing the mask. So I want to talk about two things today. The understanding was that this was about domestic violence, but then we were talking mostly about mental health. So I'm going to talk about both of them from a law enforcement perspective. And Jenny, thank you for that presentation. As always, you are very, very enlightening and very knowledgeable about the issues. So the homeless population, there are three types, as I see it, from a law enforcement perspective. There are three types of homeless categories. One is where someone can't pay their mortgage or gets evicted from their apartment, and they wind up on the street because of that. And their main objective is to get back into the mainstream by keeping a job or getting a job, finding a place to live. And many of those folks wind up at Haven for Hope. And Kenny Wilson does a great job over there as the CEO. There's another class of folks that are on the street who are homeless, because they are mentally ill. And the third category is folks who are addicted and they're mentally ill. And you could give those folks in those last two categories a room in a 5-star hotel, and they wouldn't stay there because they're either mentally ill, addicted, or both. And their life on the street allows them to live there without any rules or complications that would prohibit them from staying in a structured environment. We in SAPD have one of the most comprehensive programs when it comes to dealing with homeless people and mentally ill people. And the departments around the country, other departments around the country who have somewhat of a similar program to SAPD have it because they've mirrored what we've done. Years ago, we started our mental health unit with 2 officers and 1 sergeant. And since then, it's grown in number and with a variety of offshoots to that main unit that was started. I think it was back in 2008. People are born every day, people die every day, and people become homeless every day, and people become mentally ill every day. And there are health issues associated with homelessness and homeless encampments. There are crime issues associated with homelessness and homeless encampments. There are budgetary issues associated with trying to fix that. And I think a lot of those issues, those ancillary issues, are overlooked by some folks who try to simplify the solution to this. Excuse me. And there is no finish line when it comes to dealing with the homeless issue. Again, every day people become homeless. But and the way we've tried to address it is by working with the Haven for Hope, and they've been great partners, by working with other advocacy agencies that outreach to the homeless population. And the thing that we're really good at in the city is offering services to the homeless population, to the mentally ill population. And unfortunately, not all of them take advantage of it. If you didn't know, I would ask you to take a guess at how many people are in the courtyard at Haven for Hope on any given night. And the average is around 600 to 700 people. If that courtyard wasn't there, those folks would all be on the street in some doorway, in some alley, somewhere. So the difficulty with, and I'll close on my homeless part of my presentation with this, the difficulty in lowering those numbers is that, again, you have people every day joining the ranks of the homeless. You have people who don't want to go to the Haven, who don't want services at all. And we used to approach this from a law enforcement perspective. If you were homeless and you were camped up somewhere, we would cite you or arrest you and move you on, and leaving them with no place to go. That doesn't resolve the issue one bit. When people would see SAPD coming into the homeless encampment or coming up to talk to them, they'd run. Today, they don't do that, because what we do today, we've changed our approach. What we do today is we offer services. We offer to take homeless folks to the shelter. We offer to take them wherever they need to go to provide the services that they need. We'll transport their pets. We'll transport their property. Anything that they need to get the services that they need, we'll provide. And that's kind of where we are today from the police department's perspective. Let me jump over to domestic violence. So Jenny hit all of it in her presentation, and I'll just repeat some of it. But dealing with domestic violence is a very, very complicated issue. It's complicated because it's a difficult decision for someone in an abusive relationship to leave that relationship for a whole variety of reasons. There's children involved, there's employment involved, there's housing involved, there's pets involved, and for a victim, and in a vast percentage of the cases, the victims are females. For a female to leave that relationship leaves her with very little alternatives, and the alternative is, in many cases, to go to the homeless shelter. And Marta Perez provides a very, very great service there, and has done so for quite a long time. As a matter of fact, I'm on her board of directors for the homeless shelter. I'm sorry, for the battered women's shelter. We have increased our staffing. We've increased our accountability when it comes to dealing with domestic violence in an effort to provide as much service as we can. This, it's difficult to deal with this from a law enforcement perspective, and I'm glad that we're looking at this now from a community health perspective, because we can't, as a law enforcement agency, we can't prevent, for the most part, family violence from happening. It happens behind closed doors. It happens in silence for the most part. We want people to report any instance that they may believe is domestic violence, even though it may not be. We want to know about it so we can investigate it. We talked about protective orders. Protective orders provide a very false sense of security to the victims of family violence. Because how many murders have we seen where there have been protective orders in place? If a protective order protects victims of family violence against law-abiding citizens who may find themselves in a passionate situation where that gets carried overboard. But for a person who's non-law abiding, or a person who is so enraged at the situation, a protective order does nothing. And I've discussed that issue with Marta Perez most recently as well, because there have been protective orders in place in some of the most recent murders that we've had for family violence. Look at the murder-suicide rate for family violence. I mean, we've had two very recently. One where it was a triple murder-suicide. There was one 2 days later, a murder-suicide for two individuals in a relationship, dating relationship, where the male shot the female from the backseat of a vehicle. So again, a very, very difficult situation to deal with. We have addressed it in terms of our ability to investigate cases more thoroughly by adding more detectives and by adding additional supervisors to oversee their work to provide for more accountability. So both of the issues that I just talked about, very, very complicated, very difficult to solve, and I think that we need to approach it from other angles other than just law enforcement. And the city, in its wisdom right now, is doing just that. And thank you again, Jenny, for all your work. You do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to both these issues. So that's all that's all I have right now, and I'll be around for any questions later on.
All right. Thank you, Chief. We appreciate all that you've done to keep our community safe, particularly in this time of challenge that we're all facing. Good work. Now I'd like to introduce our final panelist, Dr. Adriana Dierich. Dr. Dierich received her PhD in counselor education and supervision from Texas A&M Corpus Christi and is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. She has extensive experience working with youth and adults facing life stresses related to changes and stages of life, trauma, anxiety, and depression. She has helped many people of diverse ages and backgrounds overcome personal and academic difficulties to become successful human beings. Dr. Dierich, thank you for being with us today. The floor is now yours.
Now I'm unmuted. Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you to everybody that is joining in today. I have to say first, it is reassuring to hear everything that the police department, the Chamber of Commerce, the city, that many different organizations are doing to promote mental health and protect our citizens. And it's also reassuring to know that we all agree that this is an important issue and that we need to continue, to move forward. There's still a long way ahead of us. When I was invited to talk here, and I don't think you can see me yet, let's make sure you can. I was invited to talk about the trends that I've been seeing. I've been working with our residents and fellows at UT Health. I'm the behavioral health consultant for UT Health San Antonio for graduate medical education, but I also have a private practice. So I have been able to see the trends in mental health issues that we have experienced as a result of COVID-19. I was also invited to talk a little bit about how to support our employees, what to say, what not to say, what behaviors to look for. And I want to start by just sharing a little bit of how unique and unprecedented these times are. When we train to be therapists, one of the first things we learn is step away from situations that are affecting you and might trigger you. So for example, if you're going through a divorce, do not work with clients that are going through a divorce because you might be triggered. And guess what? We cannot step away from this situation. One of the most unique things we've seen is that we're all affected in one way or the other by what's going on. So me as a therapist, you as an employer, Richard, the police chief, everyone, Jenny, we are all working, being very aware that we might be experiencing some of the same things that we're working with. So I invite you to take the information that I'm going to share with you and use it with your employees, but also to internalize it and use it for yourself when you need it. I think this is a perfect time to realize how important is the support between all of us. It doesn't matter what role we play in an organization or a company. First slide, please, the next one. So, of course, the main thing that I've been talking to with my clients, my residents, my fellows, is the disconnection and isolation that people are feeling. And this is expected. We had never been so physically distant from people, and we need to keep that distance for at least a few, more weeks, months. We don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty too. And we know that loneliness and isolation are closely linked to a lot of other physical and mental health problems. Heart disease, diabetes, anxiety, depression. It's a gamut of problems that can come from that. So what we recommend to do is to find a way to connect, even if it's not physical connection. So we use something called attunement, that is just this capacity to be at the same place and in the same time with others. And I have seen some very creative ways to do that. I know of a whole family that gets together once a week to play loteria, for example. And you can do these things as an organization, just to have some activities that are not work-related. There are social activities just to help people feel we're still in the same place, the same time, the same space, as others. We're just not able to be there physically. So individual check-ins have been very important. And of course, this is very validating that Jenny talked about this and the chief talked about it. Even if it's 5 minutes, just spend some individual time with a phone call, with a video conference, with some of your employers, and make sure that this happens to all of them. I've seen things like Song of the Day. Somebody chooses a song every day and everybody listens to it, and then they share, what do you think about it? And then, of course, we have Zoom. There's a lot of Zoom meetings. We know what's going on around us, but sometimes Zoom can be used just for social interactions, just to talk about the song of the day or to play the loteria, as I mentioned before. My general point is make sure that there's human connection beyond just work. Next slide, please. Grief has been the other experience that we have witnessed, that it was a little bit surprising. I don't think we were all expecting to see so much grief. Grief is usually related to loss of life, to somebody that you love dying. And of course, there has been a lot of that as well. But we have been experiencing a lot of anticipatory grief, which means I'm just grieving what I think I'm going to lose. But grief is related to a sense of loss. And we have lost so much in this pandemic. We have lost our normal way of life. We have lost our ability to go and visit with friends and families. We have lost our jobs sometimes. So grief is related to all of that. And grief never shows up just, all in once. There are 5, and some theories talk about 6 stages of grief that we all move through, and it's not linear. We go back and forth through them. So there is denial, and we see that too in our community a lot. This virus is not going to affect me. I don't care about that. There's anger. You're making me stay home. You're taking away my activities. This is also a normal response to grief. There's bargaining. Well, maybe if I stay here a week, maybe if I go to HEB just once a week, maybe if I just visit this person, it's going to be okay, right? We're trying to, make a deal. And then there's sadness when we realize, oh, wait, I don't know if this is working. I don't know when this will end. I don't know what I've lost. And with going through all of those stages, again, it's one step forward, 2 steps back. It's never linear. We reach acceptance at some point. And this is happening, and this is what I have to do to proceed. And I really appreciate Dr. Kessler's 6th stage of grief, that is finding meaning in all the pain that we have experienced and all the suffering that we have experienced. And I'm always careful with that. I never say, it happened for a good reason. It's hard to tell people, there's a good reason why this happened. Yet, we can always find a lesson to learn, a new thing that we hadn't seen, a new perspective in life when we go through this pain. And if we can bring that into work and we can help our employees move through the stages of grief, that is awesome. Can you move to the next slide, please? Fear, of course, is one of the most obvious emotions that we're experiencing, and we're afraid of everything: illness, death, the job loss, especially. And one of the biggest fears for humanity is uncertainty. And that is one thing that we're feeling a lot. So as an employer, as a supervisor, one of the things that you can do is for yourself, when you're feeling fear, anger, anything, connect to the present moment. We tend to feel anxiety and depression when we are thinking about the future or the past. When we can stay here, what's happening right now, we can cope with those emotions and let them be and happen and go. Control the things that you can control and let go of those things that you cannot control. And believe me, I am very aware of how easy it is to say it and how hard it is to do it. As a leader, I recommend that you keep open, constant, reliable communication. Don't hide things, of course, and there's always a level of, appropriateness. You know what you can share with people, but if you have a plan, share it. If you don't know, share it. The more that there's communication, we can deal with the uncertainty, the more we can cope with the fear. And I highly recommend to everyone to establish clear rules, especially now that many people are going back to work, going back outside. Establish clear rules for your organization and make people follow them, because that creates a sense of safety that is very important in these times. So if we follow our major orders, for example, if you establish specific rules in your organization, make sure they're clear, communicated, and people are following them. And those rules might vary depending on what you do, of course, but it's important that they're shared by everyone and that people can buy into them so they can feel safer. Next slide, please. Stress and burnout, of course, we are perceiving a lot of that, and they are very closely related, but they're not the same. If you can please move to the next slide, I can explain easier the difference. I like to explain it as a switch. Stress, the switch is on, and it's over-engagement. People are shaky, emotionally reactive or overreactive. The demeanor is of anxiety, hyperactivity. There's a sense of urgency, and it's really physically tolling. When you're stressed, you tend to feel very tired at the end of the day. For burnout, the switch is off. And it's like we peaked with our stress, and then we feel the disengagement, emotions are blunted, the demeanor is one of depression and detachment, and there's a sense of helplessness and hopelessness, and it's very emotionally tolling. So people might feel very tired and say, I have done nothing all day and I'm still tired. One of the main difference with stress and burnout is that stress can be related to anything in life. But burnout, as it is defined by the World Health Organization, is related specifically to work. It's an experience that has to do with work, the work context, what we feel at work. So that's where we can have a bigger impact. And it's been interesting because a lot of people are feeling burnout just because we're working in ways that we weren't used to work before. We're having to learn how to work as we work. So there's a lot of pressure to do that. If you can please move to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about what to do. On a more personal level, and as I heard our chief of police talking and Jenny talking, I was comparing their presentation to mine. This is a more intimate what to do at a personal level kind of thing. This is good for you and for your employees, for everybody. We have to be aware that we need to recharge. We need to sleep, and I will give some resources for better sleep because insomnia is another one of those things that we're seeing a lot. Good nutrition, exercise on a regular basis. This is nothing new, but it's really hard to do when we are feeling off, depressed, burnout. So working with your job demands and being flexible with that is very important. Might be that you are aware that some of your employees are working and kids are home and they're homeschooling. So being more flexible with the schedule might be very important for them. Maybe they cannot work from 1 to 2 because they're feeding their kids and putting them to nap, but they can be able to work a little harder while they're taking the nap, for example. This is all important to take into account. Mind your emotions. Emotions are so, obvious these days. Everybody's emotional in some level. Just being aware of them is the first step to be able to manage them and cope with them. We never talk about controlling emotions. We talk about learning from emotions and coping with them. So mindfulness strategies to manage stress and regulate emotions are very important. I'm sure you've seen tons of people talking about meditation and mindfulness, and I can tell you it's really effective. I use it myself. I use it with my kids. I use it with my clients. And it doesn't have to be, although I love to do that, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be just, let's stay here in the moment. If I'm brushing my teeth, let's feel the water. Let's taste the toothpaste. Let's hear the sounds around me. In one moment of just being completely present might be what you need to reset. We continue to talk about create connection, and I already touched on that a little bit. But these might be times in which you need to increase some support in that sense and respect boundaries. This is, again, a time when people are feeling very unsure with their boundaries. So talking about boundaries, setting those very clear rules that I discussed before is important. If we can move to the next slide, please. I know we're going fast. So validate and understand emotions. I'm sure you all have seen the BBC News reported that a few years ago had their kids walk into the room and now he's laughing. We used to laugh at him, now he's laughing at us. So invite acceptance and flexibility and make sure you share those ideas with your employers. Can you move to the next slide, please? And I do want to go over this because how to talk to employers might be very important. And I'm glad that Jenny already gave us some very important pointers when we suspect domestic violence, but there are so many other mental health issues that might be going on. And one of the things that we need to do is to pay attention, like she was saying, to changes in behavior. And we're seeing a lot of that. But just try to be aware, and when in doubt, ask. Invite them, let them know that you're open to hear. How to talk to an employee, about something that you are seeing. One of the things, use I statements and never talk about their personal qualities, but the behavior that you are seeing. And I will give an example after this. Show honest concern and always ask, what can I do? How can I help? And of course, again, this might require professional help. And the way that you can help them is to help them find the resources. Talk about behaviors and no personal qualities, like I said, and always have a call to action. I would recommend you use a sandwich technique. You probably have heard about that. That is that you say a good thing, a bad thing, and then a good thing. I say we can even have an open sandwich. Throw in a good thing and then tell them what you're worried about. And if you suspect suicidal ideation, we have seen a spike in suicidal ideation and behavior. Don't be afraid to ask. Asking somebody, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Will not put the wrong ideas in their mind. If they're not thinking about it, they will be very clear. No way, that's not in my plans. And interestingly enough, if they are, they usually share it with you. And then again, they might need professional help. This is not for a non-trained person to deal with. It's definitely a lot, but San Antonio has a lot of good resources, but we also have the National Suicide Prevention hotline, and they can text, they can call, they can chat online. If you can please move to the next slide. I'm not going to read it, but I want you to know that I created this kind of script for a conversation with an employee if you need to address some behavioral concerns. If this person is crying all the time, if you see them more irritable. So that's just an example that you can adapt to what you need, but I wanted to give you something very, practical that you can use. And always end with a follow-up plan. You know what? Let's touch base again next week. Let's circle back to this. I will call you next Monday so we can talk about it. Next slide, please. And I want to share with you some resources. I'm sharing with you my professional emails, both in my private practice and UT Health, and my website. Of course, you know, we are busy these days, but I will do my best to ask questions if you have any that I can answer through email. These are other very good resources, a lot of meditation and mindfulness apps online. Sleepio was created to help us sleep. It's based on CBT for insomnia, which has proven to be a very effective way to fall asleep. So please go and try it. And these are exercises resources that are online as well. And I would highly recommend you put together the resources that your company can offer and you share that with your employees as well. Because we know that when we need it the most is when it's harder to sit down and look for resources. If we have them handy, it's a lot easier to access those services that we need. And with this, I leave it back to Richard. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you.
Dr. Dierich, thank you. Fantastic insight. Really, really good stuff. I will tell you, I had never even heard of the term anticipatory grief, but it does make a lot of sense and helps bring kind of my mindset as the CEO to start thinking about it and looking at it. So very practical advice and points about employers validating emotions and being flexible, truly, truly important and very, very useful. So thank you again for that. So panelists, we've got a whole bunch of questions that have come in. So I'll start just shooting them out and then you all just please chime in. Here's one from a small business owner. I'm a small business owner, barely managing to get by since the stay-at-home work safe orders. This is my livelihood, so of course I'm stressed, and my employees are stressed as well. Bottom line, the current conditions have made it so that my business will go under if we aren't working at full capacity. How am I supposed to take care of my business and be flexible with my team when they can't really afford it? What do you think?
I'm going to jump in. I was waiting. We know that we are in a very tough place. I know this is hard. And to start, I highly recommend this person to find the support this person needs. So if you need to talk to a professional, go ahead and find a professional or a friend or somebody that can hear you, because we cannot give what we don't have. If I don't have the peace and the tranquility to share with my employees, of course, I cannot give it to them. Flexibility can show up in many different ways. So this is a time to get creative. There is no one straight answer of how to do this. I wouldn't be surprised if your employees want to come back to work at full capacity somehow. And I would actually invite you to hear what they have to say. I've seen myself, a lot of people coming up with very creative ideas on how can we do this in a way that we still respect our families and we stay safe and we can still move forward. So creativity has played a big role these days. And when we can manage our stress, we usually come up with very good ideas. But once again, I know this is a very general answer. I would highly recommend you take care of yourself first so you can take care of others.
Excellent. Thank you. Jenny, did you want to say a word or two?
I think the only thing I would say is I know that the health department and obviously SAPD we've all continued to work through this and work a lot through this. So in managing our own teams, we've thought a lot about how to support them. And we've tried a lot to have a lot of open conversations with the hotline and at the health department about, even though we have to work and we have to have everybody show up, and I think similar to what this gentleman was saying, not working is not an option. We've tried to make space to have conversations about all the things that are going on outside of work, just to acknowledge that there's a lot happening, and we're still going to be asking a lot of you, and we know that's hard.
So what I'm hearing is, number one, the CEO, the employer, the business owner needs to reach out. to resources that are available, but also talk to your employees about how can we do this thing together. So that's very good. Thank you. Collaboration. Excellent. Here's another question. Most of the discussion I've heard today involves families and children. I volunteer with a congregation of 18 to 30-year-old singles. Some live by themselves, some with roommates, and some with families. What mental health concerns should I most watch out for during the stay-at-home order?
For singles, I've seen the first one I mentioned, isolation, and the consequences of isolation definitely has been very high. I work with a lot of residents at UT Health San Antonio, and many of them are single and live by themselves. And they have told me if I didn't have to go to work, of course, because they're doctors, so they still have to show up to the hospital, I wouldn't see a single person for days. That has had a huge impact. So again, finding ways to help them stay connected and just realize that the goal here is not to feel what we feel, is to know why we're feeling it and move through it. We are going to feel all these, weird things. And I throw myself in there. Not the fact that I have the tools and the skills and the knowledge doesn't protect me completely from feeling what I need to feel, because I'm also isolated. I'm also working from home, and I'm also worried about these things. But with singles, I would concentrate greatly on isolation and the consequences of isolation and how to help them stay connected.
Excellent. Jenny, did you have a word or two?
No, I think the doctor covered it all. Thank you.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we already hit the 11 o'clock hour. We have a ton of questions still. So with your permission, I'd like to forward all those questions to you all. And if you all could help us answer them, again, we'll put it on our rapid response website so that people can have, number one, y'all's presentations, the resources, and then answers to those questions, because there's some really good ones in here. So we would really appreciate that very much. So, and there's questions for all three of you, by the way. So thank you all for that. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, thank you three for joining us today. You all have done excellent work and have really provided some good food for thought for all of us. Again, we're going to put the questions on, we're going to post them, and then we'll have resources there on our website for you all to look at a later date. I'd like to close by reminding everybody that we have the next in our congressional series coming up on Tuesday, May the 19th. Congressman Will Hurd will join us, and the event will begin at 11:30. So a lot of things going on in D.C., as you all know. Will Hurd is in a good perch to help us learn and understand and help. So we'll hear from him. And then our next Login and Learn is Thursday, May the 14th at 3:30, where we'll hear from the commanding officers from our military missions at Joint Base San Antonio. They have their own set of issues that they're dealing with. They've been doing a great job, but we'll get to learn about how they're doing it, why they're doing it, and maybe how we as a business community can help. And so you can register for those events at our SA Chamber rapidresponse.org. And lastly, I want to remind everybody about the 2020 census. As you all know, we're in the midst of census time. Filling out that census really will provide this community with resources, not only today, but into the future. And as we come out of this pandemic and, get used to what our lives look like beyond, being able to have the resources that come directly as a result of filling out that census is oh so very important. So I'll ask you to please fill the census out. Extremely important, and one thing that we as a business community believe in very fiercely and are asking you to please join us. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I say thank you again for joining us. Thank my team, and I'll say we are adjourned.